Hello, St.Francis, and we are here to just wrap up the Lenten Course and just to recap on what we've been looking at over the last 4 or 5 weeks. For me, it's been an exciting journey. For me, it's been something that's really turned my thinking on its head. And I'll hopefully bring that out as we chat with Father Mishak this morning. But let's start with the first temptation of Jesus, where the devil says to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." That was very relevant because Jesus was at the end of 40 days and he was starving. He wasn't just hungry, he was very hungry. And to do that would have been quite relevant and quite useful. But Jesus replies, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone." And we often say to ourselves, is the church relevant? Are we doing things in the world that the world wants us to do? And Henry Nouwen talks about his time in Peru, where it would have been fantastic to just feed the hungry with the cobblestones in the road. But that's not what we are called to do. We are not called to be relevant in those sorts of terms. So, Father Mishak, what is Henry Nouwen suggesting that we should be if we are not converting stones to bread?
Greetings, folks. Thanks, Rob. It is quite an interesting take. And let me use this popular thing that we usually employ when we talk about such. I believe that Henry is stepping into something that Jesus also did when he came to engage in his earthly ministry. That is using this concept, not feeding people a fish, but teaching them how to fish. And that ensuring that they move from one place to the other and they keep growing, as it were, and that growth enhancing their relationship with God. This, if I should push it any further, is better than people coming this way to one who seems to be relevant and engaging with this person, and then being able to be like a doorkeeper who gives out these things that we need. But when you have this living, authentic relationship with God, there's a direct line of communication, and what we get out of that is far better than going through any other means. You may get stale bread, but if you go through that, you get far more than that. Something that sustains us, and so, for me, Henry comes across as saying, it's far better than these things that seem like handouts that the devil was actually talking to. But our relationship with God brings about empowerment that leads us to greater things, and things that Jesus says God has in store for us.
Yeah. Jesus, or Henry Nouwen, speaks about the first love of God, that we need to have. Our first love must be for Jesus and for God, and the rest will follow. The second temptation was for Jesus to be spectacular. And the devil says to him, "If you are the Son of God, prove it by throwing yourself down from the highest pinnacle in the temple, and let's see if God saves you." Jesus answered, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And again, this is a temptation to prove who he was. And Jesus wasn't about that. Jesus was about bringing salvation to the people, not to show what a great guy he was. And Henry Nouwen says Jesus refused to be the stunt man. And so, if being the stunt man is not what we are called to do, what are we called to do, Father Richard? I always ask the tough question.
I think let me just respond to that using this beautiful quote by Henry, where he says, "Ministry is not only a communal experience, it is also a mutual experience. As Jesus ministers, he wants us to minister. He wants Peter to feed his sheep and care for them, not as professionals who know their clients' problems and take care of them, but as vulnerable brothers and sisters who know and are known, who care and are cared for, who forgive and are being forgiven, who love and are being loved." And that is the crux of the whole thing. It's not about special effects. It's not about stunts. It's about knowing who we are and our relationship with God. When you go back to the Old Testament, the prophet is told as he is sensitized about his calling and who he is, that God knew him before he was born. God had ordained him for this reason. When the devil enters our lives, he makes us kind of doubt who we are. But this is already said. God had ordained that already. And when we have that relationship with God which is right, and the relationship that is authentic, it is easy for us to withstand this kind of temptation of being stunt people, of trying to do this and that, to draw crowds to us. Crowds that might come because they see all that glitters, which might not necessarily be gold. And when they find out that it's just on the surface, they are disappointed and they turn away. But Jesus did some things very simply, and still he was able to pull crowds. When he preached, they realized there's authority in this man. He preaches with authority.
Yeah.
He healed. He did. Simple but profound. He came and he connected people at their level. He didn't lower the standards of the gospel, but he was relational.
He was. Yeah, he was. It occurred to me in these first two temptations that the temptations were for Jesus to prove himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he turned that temptation down. But immediately, his first miracle, of course, is going to the wedding at Cana, where he turns water into wine. Well, that might be spectacular. But he didn't do it for himself.
Mm-hmm.
He did it so that the glory of God could be seen.
Absolutely.
Now, folks, I want to tell you that at St.Francis, the glory of God is being seen time and time again in the various aspects of our community life. And as people pray together, as people journey together, they are seeing the spectacular work of God amongst us. And in time, I'd really like to bring some of those stories out in a video testimony or something along those lines.
Be great.
So the third temptation is to be powerful. The devil leads Jesus up to a high place and shows him all the kingdoms of the world. And he says to Jesus, "I will give you all the authority and all the splendor. It's been given to me," says the devil, "but I will give it to you. And if you worship me, you can have it." Jesus says, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Now this would be fantastic if Jesus had the power and the authority over all the kingdoms of the world. Because he could tell them what to do. He could tell them to worship God and not worship Baal or whoever. But that's not what God wants us to do. He doesn't want us to have power over people. What does he want us to do, Ishak? This is a bit like a test. Did he read the book?
I don't know if I will do justice to it if I have to respond directly or just quote one more time. And let me quote. Henry says, "It seems easier to be God than to love God. Easier to control people than to love people. Easier to own life than to love life."
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that there needs to be a shift, a move from a power thing to be love-centered people. And when that happens, again, it becomes natural and easier for us to answer the question that Jesus asked. Do you love me? It's not a power thing, but with power, it becomes very difficult for us to be able to discern and get to a point where we can see even God working in our lives. But when love dictates all, love is the center of all, love informs and inspires who and what we are and what we are about, then things take on a different trajectory and it just becomes lovely. Again, I love it when he says, we are tempted from time to time to choose power over love, control over the cross, being a leader over being led. And so there's always this. And Jesus becomes our model when he comes with a different way of engaging with this power thing. And he does not cling to power, as Paul puts it. And in that way, he becomes even more powerful. And so it connects with when Henry says, being irrelevant. Well, the world says, be relevant. And in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the world, we'll be irrelevant, but in the eyes of God, that's when we become relevant. When love is the center of everything.
Absolutely, yeah. You take the love a mother has for her child. That love for her child will cause her to do anything to protect that child. It's not the child saying, you must protect me. That's not what causes it. It's the love within the mother that reaches out to her child to protect. So what I've learnt in this thing is that if we give away our power, if we stop being spectacular ourselves, and we submit and surrender to God in everything we do, we love God first, that will make us relevant. It will make us spectacular because God will use us and work through us. And we will then have power through love. It turns everything on its head, folks. Thank you for listening. Thank you for journeying with us over the last couple of weeks. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for making this possible.
Absolutely.